project, we reached out to 50 libraries across the United States who have been impacted in one way or another by these book bans and all the things that are going on. We did all of our packages, we filled out cards, you wrote personal letters, we decorated the envelopes. We got our first response, which I'm so happy to see because I thought there was no way we're going to get a response so quickly. This is from a library in Wisconsin, which also blew me away because it's like, wow, how did it get so quickly? And I wanted to read the letter as part of the opening words. It said, "Dear members of the Ethical Culture Society, hello from Elkhorn, Wisconsin. Thank you so much for your recent message of support. It was a wonderful surprise for all of our staff to read them, and it shows just how much library lovers all over the country have in common. I hope the weather has been kind to you in the winter. Here in Wisconsin, we've had very cold temperatures but little snow." That must be just what they talk about in Wisconsin. So anyway, we're very happy to share your cards with our patrons who are massive Matheson, this is Matheson Library, supporters and love the library too. If any of you travel this way, please consider stopping by and meeting us in person. I hope you have a wonderful 2025 filled with fun, fellowship, and plenty of reading. And they took a picture of themselves, and then they signed it, put all theirs on there because we sent them a picture of all of us working as well. So I'm going to pass this around. Don't lose it. But if you want to see the pictures of the librarians and pass that around. So that's great. This mic? Here you go. Okay. All right. Zoomland, hopefully you can hear me a little bit better. Or no?
Possibly if you turn your lapel mic on, I'm not sure.
It's on.
I mean, turn it off. And then
Peter, is that better or no? Peter?
You're muted.
Who's muted? Can y'all hear me? Peter, you're muted. Can you hear us?
It's very distorted when you're using
hi,
the
Peter Rosen too. Right. Good to see you.
it's very distorted when you're using the handheld microphone, and it's very low volume when you're using the lapel mic. So it's kind of like pick your poison. I would say go for the lower.
There's no just pleasing you, is there?
It's very hard to hear you.
Maybe this has a bad battery? I don't know. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
So before y'all came in the door, we had our first gathering with our young adults and families, and one of the things that we had them do was fill out this little thing, was part of our Sunday understanding of the power of relationships to heal people and heal the world. And they were asked to imagine that they lived during the time of the Wizard of Oz, and the house that they lived in got taken away with one of their primary caregivers. Whom else would they have to help them that would take them in, and to think about that? So we said, okay, while they're gone off to the wizard, we use that kind of language, and to get some kind of task to come back, we asked them to think about how many deep connections even the youth thought they have, like aunts or uncles, grandparents who said, oh yeah, come live with me for a year. And this is the task I would have you fill this out if you ever want to do it. And then how many people would say, well, maybe not for forever, but you can stay here for a year. Like I'm going to move into Gail's house because it's so gorgeous. And yeah, so those are people who may take you in. You've already offered, so there's no backs. So, and then I went down to supporters like say Susan and David, who I knew I could sleep in their basement for about a month, and then they'd kick me out. So they would do this, and the youth filled it out, and of course, all of them ended up in the golden area because of the youth. What's interesting, though, is this is based on a book called When We Walk By, in which they looked at people of different ages, different health, those kind of stuff, and found that when they did their research of the people who were houseless, that many of them never even left the red zone, which means they didn't have enough connections to ensure that they could even make it into those places. And so the authors of the book said, really what we should focus on is not just finding affordable housing, which is what we need to do, not dealing with drug abuse and treatments and all those things which we need to do in mental health and physical health and all this other stuff, but also making sure people had deep connections. So they did as their own experience of just trying to reconnect people with their family that worked so well that many of the people they work with ended out of houselessness. And so how important it are for relationships. And one of the ways you could strengthen these relationships is just being a part of a community. How important it is for all of us to be connected to something like this, which less and less Americans are. There are less people now who are joining groups and communities and coming together, and these play such a big role for us. It's almost, as we say for many of us, like a spiritual practice of community building, especially as we all spiral out into many different directions, or just this, the centrifugal forces of our society pull us apart from one another for various reasons, and how important it is to come together.
I'm very happy to introduce our leader, Curt Collier. Curt is a certified leader. He has served as leader for 6 societies around the country, and he currently serves as consulting leader for 4 societies other than the Bergen Society. He was a community planner for the National Park Service and National Youth Organizer for Groundworks USA, going around the country providing jobs programs, construction training, and actual benefit to fix up the national parks around the country for many, many years before deciding to come back into congregational leadership. He is also currently a faculty at Fairleigh Dickinson University, teaching ethics and the philosophy of silence. The philosophy of silence.
We need more of that.
Would that there were such a thing, right? But the philosophy of science at Fairleigh Dickinson University. And I'm also very glad to say he is the leader of the Bergen Society. So without further ado, Curt.
And we're out of time. Thank you for coming. That's good. As my professors used to say to me is that if you can't make yourself understood briefly, then you really don't know what you're talking about. So I too want to share the sentiments that's been kind of spread around here, the concern. I still work as a community planner for the National Park Service. I'm basically on phone calls with various agencies across the United States on a weekly basis. That's what I do, a couple hours a week, as I said in my office, and still work with them. And so because of that, I get government emails. I'm a government employee, and so I get government emails, and they're disturbing, let's just say, to say the least. So the one that I just got recently, which I shared with some of you, is so my particular work is engaging new audiences on parks, working with diverse young adults, trying to figure out why many of our federal agencies are not reflective of the diversity of our nation, especially with around parks and the environment. So that's my particular focus. How do we engage new audiences? So the first time Trump was elected, of course, I was brought into all the way into Washington, D.C. They said, come talk to us in person. I went into the audience and they said, listen, we love what you do. Don't use the word urban youth anymore. Don't use the word diversity. I'm like, I'm left with nothing. What am I going to say? And this time it's gotten worse. Now I'm receiving letters that say, not only can I not use those words, I need to find out those who do, and I have 10 days to report them to the federal government. And if I don't, then I can be prosecuted for knowing that they're talking about diversity. Now, imagine something as important as that, something as deeply connected to the work. All of my contacts, this is what we did for the last, since I was in even in the Obama administration, of course, and happy to win an award from them. But this has been the basis of my work, is in developing new communities and focusing on these things. And I'm speaking with my colleagues in private, and of course they're all alarmed that we have to spy on our fellow workers. Their thinking is we are all just going underground because we're part of this deep state, and therefore we're just continuing to do our work. This is what they think is happening. which we are, and we're going to continue to do our work, but that also that we're doing it to subvert the government somehow, which is the ridiculous part of that, and that we have to spy. It literally almost says you need to report people who are doing this kind of thing, or else I can be prosecuted. Yeah.
What is the charge?
So it's been a history of that, of course, for a long time, and we can look out back through history. So part of what I've always tried to do is not just to stand up and say, oh, shame on them and how much I don't, but to understand why do we do some of the things we do, right? Like the homeless or the houseless problem that we have in the United States. People throwing a ton of money on it. We talk about these things. When I go to the ethical culture of Silicon Valley, it's very apparent because no one can afford to live there. I think I saw Elon Musk in a travel trailer. So it tells you how bad things are getting and how expensive it is there on the side of the road. So, yeah, I mean, these are things, and so part of the conversation they have there a lot, which you don't see here in Teaneck. If this were Silicon Valley, all along the roads here would be travel trailers, RVs, campers, and people living in front of other people's homes or living on the streets. And you see that there more. Now, these are people who have jobs working in the tech industry, if that tells you anything. So the rest of us don't even have a chance. Sorry. I also lost my glasses, and so I'm using these other glasses. So you just have to put up with it. So I also wanted to understand, kind of always want to think about what's going on in the United States, what's happening. There's this great photo of President Trump, and I don't want to just make this about him, because I think it's endemic to what's going on within the culture. I mean, he may be the identified focal point of that, and but it's also he's empowered because other people maybe feel those same ways. And he's at an event at another school shooting, and he's holding a little card. You can't see it here, but he's holding a little card, and he's saying, and someone wrote for him what he needs to say. What do you want me to know about your experience? How can I help you feel safe? And then they also wrote in here, don't forget to say, I hear you. And I'm thinking, isn't that something you would normally respond? Isn't this something you would already obviously have a skill to? Why do you have to be reminded to look at people and say, who are grieving, and say, man, just to say what they need to say? And it told me that the level of empathy perhaps goes pretty low within certain individuals, and I wanted to understand what that is. Of course, empathy has two parts to it. We have cognitive empathy, they say, which is our imagining at least other people's perspectives, right? The ability to understand other people's perspective, which is kind of a cognitive thing. But of course, the other part we often talk about is the emotional, which is the caring or compassion or concern that happens because that we can imagine what they're going through and understanding those kind of stuff. Empathy is our ability to understand and share the feelings of another and to connect with that and to feel what they feel, which is pretty unique about that. Jennifer Rubin, who is right for the Washington Post, had said that the global lack of empathy has been manifested in an erosion of civility, decency, and compassion in our society that we can see in political polarization today, she says. It's all now us versus them thinking styles. We see it in hate crimes and the demonizing of immigrants and refugees. So from her perspective, there's something that's going on, this lack of empathy that's happening across the country, and that how do we kind of respond to that? Now, I look then into research to ask the question, which was the title of this, is empathy declining in America and is it impacting us politically? And almost all of the research is based on the work of someone named Sarah Conrad, who has a PhD in philanthropic studies at the Indiana University. She received her PhD in social psychology, and she is director of the interdisciplinary program on empathy and altruism research. And she actually did quite a number of studies. Every time I saw something on empathy, they referred to her. So I thought, wow, this is a woman who obviously has done a lot of good stuff. So I looked at her research, saw that she had podcasts, listened to some of her stuff, and listened to some of her being interviewed. And this is some of the stuff that she has discovered. first of all, empathy, she's a researcher. She says it's a combination of nature and nurture. Some people are just born with a better ability to be empathic, to really feel the emotions of others and to respond to that. But she also thought it was a lot about nurture, how you're taught to do that. One of the things I talk to my own students is the research on ethics and emotional language. That the more you're comfortable and had the more higher levels of emotional intelligence, which is what we try to foster in the youth here, the more often that people engage in ethical actions, that we use our emotions almost like our radar, sensing what's going on in the world, and then obviously being able to respond to that. Many species, she says, show empathy. It has to do with also how long the children need to be reared and had to be taken care of, and so the parents of that species are paying attention. And she says even mammals tend to have long gestation periods and then longer. It takes usually about 32 before kids leave their house. Sometimes a little longer. But that we just have this long kind of period in which we need to take care of youth today and stuff. But she says even crocodiles are very loving to their parents. They take care of their kids. They defend their babies against other crocodiles. They put all the baby crocodiles in their mouth. Those of us from Louisiana and Texas, you see that. They swim them to safe areas and release them from there. So she says, it goes pretty deep within our ability. Our brains are wired to respond kind of to the actions of another. We have what are called mirror neurons in our brains. And if we're watching someone do something like simple, like pick up and put the glasses on it, part of you who wear glasses can feel that actually within your own brain. You know what that feels like. You know what the experience of that. Parts of our brain light up because we have this ability to mirror what other people are experiencing. And it runs pretty deep. It's built into our own biology. What's interesting, though, about humans is that even reading can evoke deep empathy for characters, right? There's tremendous amount of research to show fiction readers are actually more empathic than a lot of other people because their rich imagination and all the stuff that happens with reading reinforces this thing, even more so than those of us who spend most of our time reading nonfiction. But that we have the ability of humans to even imagine what another person is going through, identify with the character, feel what they're feeling, even though we're just reading little marks on the page, which is pretty remarkable. We're not just seeing people, we're imagining what that feels like, and we can operate pretty deep with that. So lots of studies have looked at her work, and what she did is she went into college campuses for many, many years, and she interviewed youth and asked them, do you think you feel or care about other people, to what extent? And she tried to measure that, and since about 2009, she's seen about a 43% decrease in the number of people who said that they feel less empathic, that they're less empathy, that they care a little less about those kinds of stuff. And so she reported this drop, and especially we went to several different groups, studied several different people in several different situations, and for most people, at least 21% of them say, these are young adults responding, but most of them are saying that I used to care more, I think, than I care now. I'm caring a little less, and she's tried to document it. So a lot of this research is built on people who self-reported whether or not they feel less empathic. But she also looked at other kinds of things, like the number of people who are engaging in hobbies has decreased in the United States. Why was that so? The number of people who are volunteering, we know, has plummeted in the United States, right? It used to be quite high. It used to be an average American would go and do something. Maybe there was a local drive and they went and participated in that and they helped out somehow. That's now to 16% in the state of New Jersey of people who are saying, I'll tell you that I always talk to crowds like this and they go, that can't be true. You're the people who are probably volunteering and you're in this room, and there may be a deep connection to that as well. And a lot of people are not doing that. So the question is why? What's going on? Why are we supposedly reporting this less? And other people have tried to use her data and look at it. So these are just self-reporting, and they want to understand more. So the first thing they did is they went and started testing babies, and they have empathy tests for little babies. And the famous one, of course, is there's a kind of a hill, right? And there's a little triangle trying to make its way up a hill and struggling, and little triangles make up the hill and it's struggling, and then the square comes up and pushes the triangle up the hill. And then afterwards, they have a square, a triangle, and circle and toys, and the kids gravitate to the square-shaped toy. Like, that was a good toy. They like that. It's being supportive, and it's helping the little triangle. But sometimes the triangle's trying to go up, and then the little X is sitting there, and it's pushing it down, and the triangle's pushing it up. They're trying to get up, and the X is pushing it down. And kids had bad reactions to the X. They didn't like that, even at a very young, very young age. Little babies who can do this kind of stuff. And just they see what toys they gravitate to. And so we still have these kinds of connections. Babies in nurseries, when one start crying, they all still crying. Things to a certain extent have not changed, right? We are still seeing the same levels of empathy within young children. So what then has to be happening in order for people to say, I am less empathic today? Right? So those are two different questions. People are still they think is empathic. We haven't lost the ability. They do these massive tests with young adults and say, can you spot the emotions? Now, there is a rise in some things like in the people on the autistic spectrum, which we're still trying to understand that, who have difficulty maybe in identifying those. And we're clearly seeing an increase in that. But by and large, the majority of young kids can look out. And we did that test in this very room with our youth. They can identify emotional states, even nuanced emotional states, pretty easily. They kind of know that a person is conflict, they're worrying, they're scared, they could do that. And they could still identify those things across the board. So what's changed? Why is it that people say that they're less empathic today than anything else? And here's what some researchers say that we're still exploring and worth exploring. The first thing is, some people are saying life is much harder today, and we're focusing more on ourselves. That's the first thing that some researchers say. And I question that because life has always been hard and life has always been difficult, but it's also that when they compare different countries where there was more of a struggle, versus those who had a social security net, what are the happiest countries in the world? Where are the happiest self-reported countries in the world? Scandinavia, yeah, right there. Like, what else do you have to be happy? It's all snow anyway. They don't have any real challenges. Kidding. But they also have the strongest social security safety nets in the world. And in fact, when they look and just kind of do this across the board, countries that report higher levels of happiness have broader social security nets. Do we have a very good social security net in the United States? No. It's a mixed bag, right? I mean, it can carry you only so far. I told you that when we moved to New Jersey, it took me a year and a half to get Medicaid for my own son. And then they gave it to him for 3 months, and then they took it away. And they said, wait, you live in Virginia. And like, we just went through a year and a half process to show that we lived here. So we're back to square one on that stuff. We also know that, so as life gets harder for some people, we also have tested people who go through very, very difficult things in their life. And yeah, you can imagine their psychic energy is kind of caught up with taking care of themselves. Not that they're selfish, it's just that their energy is kind of directed otherwards, and they don't score as high on these kinds of those tests. We also know that trauma can do this to a lot of people. That would make sense. And they actually compared two big traumatic events in the United States. The first was 9/11, and the second was Hurricane Katrina. And some interesting research has come out from those two things. If you're in both of those horrible events in the United States, in which place do researchers say they saw more levels of empathy than in the other? Which level did we see more levels of empathy, Hurricane Katrina or after 9/11? This is part of the test, and half of you are failing it. No. Yeah, Katrina. So why Katrina as opposed to 9/11? Well, that's everybody is suffering the same thing, right? There's maybe a piece of that. Huh? Maybe it's a force of nature, maybe that. What would you say? Yeah, you might be able to help out. Elliot, you get a gold star. And they're thinking of is that after 9/11, there really wasn't much for others to do in the way that there was to do in Hurricane Katrina. There were more opportunities for people to step in because it was a wider disaster, right? It was literally from New Orleans all the way to Florida. That's how big that storm was, right? Remember, after that, we took all of those school supplies. I went down to several societies with a truck. We loaded it up with several of you gave materials, and then we drove it all the way to L.C. Collier Elementary, named after my aunt, in Mobile County, because many of the schools have been wiped out in that area and delivered school supplies. And we saw that. We saw lots of people able to get involved and things like that. When 9/11 happened, I heard that they were calling for clergy. I knew there wouldn't be enough of non-theistic people there. I drove headed towards the Bronx. The National Guard stopped me. I showed them my military ID, faked it, made it through there, went down there. There were all of these clergy, yes, where they told us to go. We're all sitting in the room with really nothing to do. There was no survivors, and and it was a very localized area and things like that. And it wasn't until later that we all found ways to memorialize these things and get involved. But I remember going literally to the fire station and delivering, remember, the boots and the things that they asked us to drop off there. And the fire station said, "Okay, enough with the boots. Thank you. That's lovely," but there was just not enough. And so just even how we respond, is there a way for us to even to respond, can have a difference. But there's also something about how echo chambers reduce empathy. And think about this for a second. Empathy is the ability to notice what other people are feeling and to respond to those kinds of things. If everybody is feeling and acting and thinking exactly like you, are you really expanding your amount of your empathy? Do you really kind of understand, or are you just kind of in that confirmation of what you believe? From the South, and you could drive into this place that was in town, and he had Rush Limbaugh from 7 o'clock in the morning to 7 o'clock at night when he closed. All day long, they'd listen to those radio stations, that constant thing that how bad the world is and how horrible other people are, and that they're the problems, the other people are problems. What does that do to our psyche when we're constantly fed this story that they're the problem, you just need to do that, and we're not getting all the deep nuances of the stuff that's going on? Other researchers suggest that we are actually far more lonely today and more isolated than any time in U.S. history, right? More people are disconnected from others. They're more sitting in their apartments. They're more not going out. We've seen the massive plummet in social engagement across the United States, from, yes, well, that cell phone's right, make it easier. I don't really need y'all. I could be fed everything I need, and I can order food from it. I don't need you, really. And so we see this just dramatic plummet of how many people join congregations, from as high as almost 80 to 90%, depending on the researcher, of people who were members even of congregations, to less than 33% today. Wow. Which is the reason why so many congregations are closing their doors. And in the next 10 years, they suspect 100,000 churches to close their doors in the United States. We have now seen the first time in U.S. history, despite our population continue to grow, less people members of congregations or groups than ever before. We showed the film here, Join or Die, about the drop in civic engagement and all these problems. So researchers then looked at who is the most lonely and isolated in the United States, which demographics or which cohorts or what populations?
Elderly.
Elderly, one of them, yeah. Rural. Rural is where they're seeing the largest amounts and the drops of loneliness and increases of isolation across the United States. How would that impact us politically? Which states despite the fact that they need health care, they need everything, they're actually, rural citizens are sicker than urban populations that they've done this. They're more isolated, more lonely. They have they're more in poverty levels than in urban environments. And if you're in those environments, if you're isolated or disconnected from others and you're lonely and you're off by yourself, then they think that your levels of empathy, of course, drop as well. The other thing, of course, is they think maybe it has something to do with the communications and the way we use technology. If we're going to fight in this society, we're going to fight over Zoom. If we're in the room together, we're lovely and stuff. There's something about that ability not to read entire body language, right, and how important that is. If you're a person who relies heavily on bodily information for understanding what's going on, and they think that also has had a big drop and an impact because we're communicating through smaller and smaller devices. I don't even know where my phone is. Those screens, there's not enough for us to connect with family and friends to really feel them in ways that we do when we're in the room together. And that even their empathy, they say, is of course declining. They can take a group of people, put them in Zoom and have them interact. They see less empathy and less markers of empathy, like I hear you, I feel you, I understand that, sharing stories through Zoom, than if those same people end up in the room together. That we are a community species who can read all kinds of cues from other people, and we need those rich environments in order to do that. But the final big group of people that I've read and research on this said that maybe our biggest problem, they believe, is desensitization, wow, or what they call empathy burnout. Empathy burnout. They said frequent exposure to violence, they know, desensitizes us to it, and we act more numb. Social media has made the violence, they said, around the world more real. We're constantly listening to this. And in fact, you know, first there was print and you got your weekly newspaper, maybe your daily newspaper, and you kind of read an article. Then there was the nightly news and you got 1 hour a day of that kind of stuff. And so they've looked at how much do you hear about what's going on around the world, looking at various generations, right? When you were younger, what was it? It was Walter Cronkite, you know, that one, the Evening News Dispatch. Maybe you read something in the New York Times. Many of you still read the New York Times. So we would spend, they said, on an average, maybe 90 minutes a day listening to news. What is the average American? How much news do they listen to today? From 90 minutes to 5 hours. 5 hours of news per day, right? And you can go into a lot of households, and it used to be soap operas that maybe on the, like my grandmother, that's all she listened to her stories. And she fell asleep on the couch. Or as opposed to today where people can be on there all day long, 5 hours a day. Think about it. You get up in the morning, how many of you, and you get up in the morning, look at the headlines for the night before? How many of you then maybe watch or turn the news on or have it in the background, maybe your car radio or something, and you're going to work, you're listening to it? How many of you come home, turn and watch all of the different cable networks and watch a bunch of news and then go online and then check all those kinds of stuff out? And they say that we have now been awashed with so much of this information that it's having an impact on people. They did this research of asking people, and they reported that 57% of women report feeling exhausted after watching negative news. How many of you feel exhausted after watching a lot of the news? Yeah, look at us. We're exhausted. We are exhausted by this. 61% of Americans report turning off the news or switching channels now, right? More and more of us are like, I can't take Gaza, Ukraine, Trump, January 6th, pandemic, the stuff that we're now fed hours on day all along. And it's just bombarding us from multiple directions, right? And then we're constantly listening in this, right? Police brutality, shootings in schools, the immigrant plight at the border, the Capitol riots, and now with the Trump election and all the crap that's going on with that. right? That we're constantly listening to all this stuff. And so 30% of Americans now report following a news story only for a few days, right? We may have Katrina followed it for longer. Now it's only a few days, and at that point, people are done. And you may sense that for yourself, like, I only have so much bandwidth for this, I'm done, right? I can't seem to do as much as that. 23% of Americans said they've now no longer follow any news at all. Right? Almost, a fifth of Americans no longer listening to news. Huh? Yeah, there are a lot more people who are saying, listen, I just can't take it anymore. It's too much of that. And 57% of Americans say the news is just toxicity all day long. And we report that it's toxic to us all this stuff. So that could be one of the big things that's impacting us as well. That children are just as empathic. People are still trying to connect, but now we don't have really, really great ways to do that. We're bombarded with lots of information because we care, because we are empathic people, because we want to have to do this. They tried that in isolation. So they went to residents, these are people getting their medical degree, and they studied the amount of empathy that they had from when they started in the first year to the 6th year of residency. Which group, the first year or the 6th year, is more empathic and more feeling towards their patients? First year. And by the time they got to the 6th year, at their massive caseloads of us just saying to people again and again, oh my God, this is bad, listening all this stuff, by the time they looked at their 6th year residents, they were saying, you know what, here's the pill. They were less empathic and we're losing that ability, which is the reason why a lot of medical schools were trying to find a way to kind of heal those things. So it does have impact on us. We do shut off our brains, even if we're educated and caring. We went into the field of healthcare, but somehow at the end of that, we just can't take it anymore. So then what do they say how to rebuild empathy in America? And this is going to sound a little counterintuitive. The first thing they said, you may want to turn off the news for a while, or at least decrease the amount of social media. And for some of us who are watching what's going on in the world, that's like, no, I need to check the news. I'm the same way. I wake up in the middle of the night. If I get up at 3 a.m., I put on CNN and I turn on the news, right? Exactly what they say you should not do. That we need to make sure that we're building in times for rest and recovery. I loved reading Lisa, after the election, y'all went hiking, you went to Arches, you went to go see family, you did other things just to kind of rebuild their sense of selfness at that point. Did it work? A little bit, yeah, because you're still worried. It's the roller coaster that we're all on. So the other thing that they said is you all need some rest. You all need more exercise. You all need to connect more deeply with family. You all need to start eating healthy again. That's me, I think. You all need to volunteer directly, which is what we do here often, which is why I think you're in this room. And not just sending in a check, which is a good thing to do, but it's also to connect with other people. That you need to move out of your echo chamber for a little while to make sure that you're really hearing everyone. And that you do whatever you can to establish relationships with other people. So I'm going to leave you with these words. They were quoted to Ralph Waldo Emerson, but Emerson actually never said this. A woman named Bessie Anderson Stanley went to a contest, and the contest says it will give you $250 if you can define what is success in 100 words. She entered the contest back in the 1918 or something like that, won the $250, and then she ended up in Bartlett's, but they said it was Emerson who said it. And Emerson never said these words. And she writes this, and the question is, what does it mean to be successful? And excuse the male language, I'll try and, they who are successful, who has lived well, who laugh often, and who love much, who has enjoyed the trust of pure people, the respect of intelligent people, and the love of little children, who has filled their niche and accomplished their task, who never lacked appreciation of earth's beauty or failed to express it, who has left the world better than they found it, whether an improved garden, a perfect poem, or a rescued soul, who has never lacked appreciation of earth's beauty or failed to express it, who has always looked for the best in others and given them the best they had, whose life was an inspiration and whose memory is a benediction. And I think if I'm trying to reclaim my own sense of empathy, I just need to focus on the little things I can, this community that we can build, the work that we can do. I'm a wall, for sure, against other things, and I will continue to be that wall and push back. But I also know that if I'm going to have any impact, that empathy is going to be part of that, and there's other pathways to that as well. Thank you all.
Curt, thank you so much for those really hopeful and inspiring words in what are otherwise challenging times, and good things for us to take with us today.
To learn more about us, visit our website, ethicalfocus.org, or email us at admin@ethicalfocus.org, and we'll get back to you. To make a donation, go to ethicalfocus.org/donate. Please follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and you can watch many of our past programs on our YouTube channel.